Hello, dear listener, and welcome to Whisper Tales. Tonight, as the fire crackles softly and the winds carry whispers from distant lands, I invite you to journey with me to a place steeped in mystery and magic. Let your worries drift like leaves on a gentle stream, and allow yourself to be carried into the heart of an Irish folk tale where the sea meets the sky and ancient legends come to life. Close your eyes, if you will, and imagine the rugged shores of Northern Ireland. The waves crash against jagged cliffs, their song eternal and haunting. Mist clings to the air, veiling the world in a quiet, otherworldly beauty. It's a place where the lines between our world and the magical realm blur, where the sea holds secrets it only shares with those brave enough to listen. Tonight, we will walk these shores and meet a fisherman named Ronan. He is a man of solitude, his days shaped by the tides and his nights filled with the stories of the sea. But even he could not have foreseen what fate had in store for him on one fateful evening. For on this night, beneath the silver light of the moon, Ronan will encounter something extraordinary. A creature of the sea, neither fully of our world nor entirely of another. A Selkie, a being of legend who walks the fine line between love and freedom, between the pull of the waves and the ties of the shore. So, lean back, let the flickering shadows of the tale guide you, and join me as we unravel this story of wonder, choice, and the untamed spirit of the sea. Shall we begin? Picture, if you will, the rugged coastline of Northern Ireland. The land here is as wild and untamed as the stories it inspires. Sharp cliffs rise like ancient sentinels from the restless sea, their edges softened only by the moss and wildflowers that cling to life in the crevices. Below, the waves crash with relentless determination, their foam tracing patterns on the dark, glistening rocks. The air is cool and damp, carrying with it the scent of salt and seaweed. A faint mist hangs over the shore, muffling sound and making the world feel smaller, closer, as though the horizon has pulled itself inward to listen. This is a place where time seems to slow, where the past lingers just beneath the surface of the present. Legends are born in places like this. Fishermen speak of strange lights that dance upon the waves and voices that call from the depths on moonless nights. Grandmothers tell their grandchildren tales of the Selkies, seals who shed their skins to walk the earth as men and women, only to return to the sea when the tides call them home. It is said that the Selkies are creatures of deep longing, caught between two worlds. Their lives are woven with the pull of the waves and the lure of the land, their spirits forever restless. To glimpse a Selkie is to see something rare and beautiful, a fleeting connection between the ordinary and the extraordinary. And so, it is here, on a night when the stars flicker faintly through the mist and the waves seem to whisper secrets to the shore, that our story unfolds. A solitary fisherman, Ronan, stands on the edge of this timeless world. Little does he know that tonight, his quiet life will collide with the magic of the sea, and nothing will ever be the same. Ronan lived a life as steady and predictable as the tides. He was a fisherman, born and raised in a small village where the sea was both provider and master. His days began before the sun rose, when the world was still wrapped in darkness. He would load his small boat with nets and set out onto the open water, guided only by the faint light of the stars and the instincts passed down from generations before him. His hands were rough, marked by years of work, and his skin carried the scent of salt and fish. Yet his eyes held a quiet intensity, a deep connection to the world around him. Ronan was not a man of many words. The villagers often described him as distant, but not unkind. He was the sort of man who listened more than he spoke, who preferred the solitude of the sea to the chatter of the pub. At night, Ronan would sit by the fire in his modest stone cottage, its walls thick against the coastal winds. The hearth was the heart of his home, the flickering flames casting long shadows on the rough wooden furniture. A small shelf held a collection of old books, most of them sea tales and myths his grandmother had passed down to him. Ronan often found himself drawn to one story in particular, the legend of the Selkies. His grandmother's voice would echo in his mind, "The sea holds its secrets close, my boy, but the Selkies are the rarest of all. They're not meant to stay in our world, and woe to the one who tries to keep them." He would chuckle at the thought, dismissing it as an old woman's fancy. Yet, on certain nights, when the waves seemed to hum with a strange melody and the seals gathered on the distant rocks, he couldn't help but wonder. Ronan's life, though solitary, was not without its rhythm. He found comfort in the predictability of his days, in the endless cycle of the tides. But beneath that rhythm lay a quiet yearning, an unspoken desire for something more. Little did he know, the sea was about to answer that longing in a way he could never have imagined. It was a moonlit night, the kind that made the sea look like a vast sheet of silver. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the faint scent of salt and seaweed. Ronan had set out on the water later than usual, his small wooden boat gliding smoothly over the calm waves. He had been hoping for a better catch. The past few days had been unkind, and his nets had returned nearly empty. The sea, as always, gave and took as it pleased. Yet tonight, as Ronan cast his net and watched the moonlight dance on the water's surface, a strange unease crept over him. The usual sounds of the sea, the rhythmic crash of waves, the distant cries of seabirds, seemed muffled, as if the world were holding its breath. Then, from the corner of his eye, Ronan noticed movement. On a rocky outcrop not far from his boat, a group of seals had gathered, their dark forms glistening in the moonlight. This was not unusual. Seals often basked on the rocks at night. But there was something different about these seals. They seemed almost attentive. Ronan frowned, leaning forward to get a better look. The seals weren't simply lying there, they were watching. Their round, glistening eyes were fixed not on him, but on something just beyond the rocks. And then he heard it. A melody, soft and haunting, drifted over the water. It wasn't like any song Ronan had heard before. It was both mournful and enchanting, a sound that seemed to seep into his very bones. For a moment, he thought it might be the wind playing tricks on him, but the melody grew stronger, more deliberate. Ronan's pulse quickened. The seals, too, seemed transfixed by the sound, their heads tilting as if listening to an unseen musician. Then, from the shadows of the rocks, a figure emerged. At first, Ronan thought it was another seal, its form dark and glistening. But as the figure moved, stepping onto the rocks, he realized it was something else entirely. The seal appeared to shed its skin, revealing a woman beneath. Her hair, dark and flowing, caught the moonlight, and her movements were graceful, almost otherworldly. Ronan's breath caught in his throat. A Selkie. She stood there for a moment, her eyes scanning the horizon, her expression both serene and sorrowful. The seals around her seemed to bow their heads slightly, as though acknowledging her presence. Ronan knew he should look away, that he was intruding on something sacred. But he couldn't move. He was captivated by her, by the way the moonlight illuminated her features, by the song that seemed to weave itself into the very fabric of the night. The Selkie turned her head, her dark eyes meeting his. For a moment, time seemed to stop. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she vanished, diving into the water and disappearing beneath the waves. The seals followed her, slipping silently into the sea, leaving the rocky outcrop empty and still. Ronan sat in his boat, his heart pounding. He had heard the stories, of course, but he had never believed them. Now, as he gazed at the empty rocks and listened to the faint echoes of the Selkie's song, he knew the truth. The sea had secrets, and tonight it had revealed one of its rarest. The days that followed were restless ones for Ronan. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the image of the Selkie from his mind. Her graceful movements, the haunting melody that had filled the air, and the way her eyes had met his, it was as if the sea had reached into his very soul and left its mark. Every evening, he found himself returning to the same rocky outcrop, his small boat anchored nearby as he watched and waited. He told himself it was foolishness, that she wouldn't return, but something deeper, a yearning he couldn't name, kept drawing him back. And then, one moonlit night, his patience was rewarded. The Selkie appeared again, emerging from the waves with her seal skin draped around her shoulders. She climbed onto the rocks, her movements as fluid as the tide, and gazed out at the horizon. Her hair shimmered like woven starlight, and the song she sang, though soft, carried an ache that seemed to fill the night itself. Ronan's breath caught as he watched from his boat, hidden in the shadows. He knew he was trespassing on something sacred, but he couldn't tear his eyes away. The Selkie removed her skin and laid it carefully on the rocks before stepping onto the shore, her bare feet gliding across the wet sand. Her human form was more beautiful than Ronan had dared to imagine, but it was her presence, ethereal, untouchable, that held him spellbound. Then, an idea began to form in his mind. He thought of the stories his grandmother had told him. A Selkie cannot return to the sea without her skin. If a man takes it, she must stay with him until it is returned. The thought sent a thrill of excitement through him, but it was tinged with guilt. Was it right to take something so precious? To bind her to a life she might not choose? But as he watched her, alone on the shore, his longing outweighed his doubts. Carefully, silently, Ronan crept toward the rocks, his footsteps muffled by the sound of the waves. The Selkie, lost in her song, didn't notice as he reached for her skin, its texture soft and damp in his hands. As soon as he touched it, a strange energy coursed through him, like the pulse of the ocean itself. He hesitated for a moment, but then he tucked the skin under his coat and retreated to the safety of his boat. The Selkie turned as if sensing something, her song faltering. She scanned the shore, her expression shifting from serene to alarmed. When her eyes fell on the empty spot where her skin had been, she let out a cry, a sound so raw and sorrowful that it pierced Ronan's heart. She searched desperately, her hands trembling as they traced the rocks. But the skin was gone, and with it, her freedom. Ronan stepped out from the shadows, his heart heavy but his resolve firm. "I mean you no harm," he said, his voice trembling. "Please, come with me. You don't have to be alone." The Selkie's dark eyes met his, filled with both fear and anger. But she had no choice. Without her skin, she couldn't return to the sea. Slowly, reluctantly, she followed him to the boat. As they rowed back to the shore, Ronan couldn't bring himself to look at her. He had her skin, and she would stay. But deep inside, he wondered if he had stolen something far more precious than her seal's coat. Ronan's small stone cottage was now filled with a silence deeper than any he had known. The Selkie, in her human form, sat quietly by the window, her dark eyes fixed on the distant sea. Her presence brought a weight to the room, a heaviness born of longing and loss. She spoke no words, barely touched the meals Ronan prepared for her, and moved with the grace of someone who didn't quite belong. Ronan saw her loneliness as clearly as he saw the waves crashing against the shore. He didn't know who she truly was or where she had come from, but her quiet presence seemed to fill a void he hadn't realized existed. He decided to give her a name, something to make her feel less like a stranger. "Mirren," he whispered one evening, the word meaning little sea in his native tongue. He didn't say it to her directly, but in his heart, the name felt right. One evening, he tried to break through her silence. "Mirren," he said softly, "I could show you this place. The hills, the forests, the sky, maybe," he faltered, her gaze meeting his with an intensity that stopped his words. Her eyes, so full of longing, told him everything he needed to know. Over time, the distance between them softened, though it never disappeared entirely. The Selkie began to accept the meals he prepared, sitting by the fire as Ronan spoke to her about his days and the sea. Occasionally, she would hum soft, mournful tunes, melodies that felt like echoes of the ocean itself. One day, Ronan invited her to walk by the shore. At first, she hesitated, but eventually, she nodded. When they reached the rocky coastline, something in her demeanor shifted. She knelt by the water, her hands trailing through the surf, and for the first time, Ronan saw her smile, a fleeting moment of connection with the sea. He watched from a distance as she whispered to the waves, her voice too soft for him to hear. A group of seals gathered nearby, their dark heads bobbing in the water, as if acknowledging her presence. In that moment, Ronan understood more deeply than ever where she truly belonged. As the days turned into weeks, a fragile bond began to form. The Selkie, whom Ronan still called Mirren, began to hum songs that sounded ancient and otherworldly. Her voice, though soft, carried a weight that seemed to pull at his very soul. He felt himself growing closer to her, but with every step forward, the ache of knowing she didn't belong to this world grew stronger. One night, as they sat by the fire, Ronan finally asked her the question that had been haunting him. "Does it bring you peace?" he asked. "Being here with me?" For a long moment, she didn't respond. Her gaze remained fixed on the flames, her expression unreadable. Then, she turned to him, and for the first time, she spoke. "Without the sea, I cannot be." Her words were soft, but they struck Ronan like a storm. He had her skin, and she could not leave. But the weight of her loss was too heavy to ignore. He had stolen something precious, and though she stayed, her spirit was always reaching for the waves. And yet, they shared something. In the silences they walked together and the quiet songs she hummed, there was an understanding. But Ronan knew the shadow of her longing would never leave. And in that shadow, he realized a choice was waiting for him. The days grew longer, and the soft rhythm of life between Ronan and the Selkie settled into something fragile and bittersweet. Yet beneath the surface of their quiet routines, an unspoken tension began to rise, like a tide that could not be held back. The Selkie, whom Ronan still called Murin, often walked along the shore in the evenings. She would linger where the waves kissed the sand, her feet just brushing the water as if testing a boundary she could not cross. Her gaze always turned to the horizon, her dark eyes scanning the endless expanse of sea. Ronan watched her from afar, his heart heavy. He wanted to believe that her time with him was enough, that the cottage, the meals they shared, and the quiet moments by the fire could fill the ache in her heart. But the truth was clear, the call of the sea was growing stronger. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of orange and gold, Ronan found her kneeling by the water. Her hands cupped the waves as if holding something unseen, her lips moving in soft whispers. It wasn't a song this time, but words, a language Ronan couldn't understand but felt deep in his chest. "What do you say to it?" he asked, stepping closer. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, she hesitated, as though weighing whether to answer. "I ask it to take me back," she said finally, her voice soft but resolute. The words struck Ronan like a blow. He had known this truth all along, but hearing it aloud made it impossible to ignore. "You're not a prisoner here," he said, his voice tight. "You..." She cut him off with a sharp look. "You have my skin," she said simply. "Without it, I cannot leave." Her words hung in the air, heavy with accusation. Ronan felt the weight of them, the shame of what he had done. He had told himself that taking her skin was a way to bring her into his world, to make her stay. But now, as he looked at her, he realized how deeply he had misunderstood. "I only wanted," his voice faltered. "I only wanted you to stay." Her gaze softened, but her eyes were still distant, still fixed on the waves. "I am not meant to stay," she said. "The sea is my home. Without it, I am incomplete." The silence that followed was filled with the sound of the waves, a steady, unrelenting rhythm that seemed to echo her words. Ronan turned away, unable to meet her eyes. He knew what he had to do, but the thought of it tore at him. That night, as they sat by the fire, the Selkie didn't hum her usual melodies. She stared into the flames, her expression calm but resolute. Ronan, too, remained silent, his mind racing. He had taken her from the sea, but he couldn't take the sea from her. And now he was faced with a choice, to hold on to her and watch her spirit wither, or to let her go and lose her forever. The tide was rising, and time was running out. The night was restless, the air heavy with unspoken truths. Ronan lay awake by the dying embers of the fire, the Selkie's soft breathing the only sound in the quiet cottage. He had tried to hold on to her, to believe that keeping her skin hidden would somehow keep her by his side. But her sorrow was like the tide, inevitable, unyielding, and constant. As the first light of dawn crept through the window, Ronan made his decision. He rose quietly, careful not to wake her, and retrieved the bundle he had hidden beneath the floorboards. Her skin, soft and silken, seemed to shimmer faintly in the dim light. It felt alive in his hands, pulsing with the energy of the sea. He stared at it for a long moment, his heart torn. Letting her go meant losing her forever. But keeping her here, bound to a life she hadn't chosen, was something he could no longer bear. When she awoke, she found him standing in the doorway, the seal skin draped over his arm. Her eyes widened in disbelief as she sat up, her gaze locking onto the bundle in his hands. "I can't keep it from you anymore," he said, his voice steady but laced with pain. I thought I could make you happy here. But I see now that I was wrong." The Selkie rose slowly, her expression unreadable. She stepped toward him, her movements cautious, as though she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. When she reached him, she took the skin from his hands, cradling it as if it were a part of herself that had been missing. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the moment hung between them, heavy and bittersweet. Finally, she looked up at him, her dark eyes shimmering with gratitude and something deeper, sorrow. "You've given me back my freedom," she said softly. "For that, I will always be grateful." Ronan nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He wanted to tell her to stay, to ask her to find a way to be part of his world. But he knew better. Love, he realized, was not about holding on. It was about letting go. Together, they walked to the shore, the waves lapping gently at their feet. The sun had risen fully now, casting a golden glow over the water. The Selkie turned to him one last time, her gaze filled with a quiet sadness. "You have a kind heart, Ronan," she said, "and a brave one. I will remember you." With that, she stepped into the waves, her seal skin draped over her shoulders. She paused for a moment, the water swirling around her ankles, and then she was gone, diving beneath the surface, her form melding seamlessly with the sea. Ronan stood there for a long time, watching the horizon. The sea, as always, was restless, its surface glittering in the sunlight. She was out there now, free to return to the world she belonged to. And though his heart ached with her absence, he felt a strange sense of peace. In letting her go, he had given her the only gift that truly mattered. The days that followed the Selkie's departure were quiet, though not in the way Ronan had expected. The weight of her absence filled the air, but so too did a strange sense of calm, like the sea after a storm. Ronan returned to his routines, mending his nets, setting out before dawn, and hauling in the catch that sustained his modest life. Yet everything felt different now. The waves that lapped against his boat seemed to carry her song, faint but unmistakable, as if the sea itself remembered. At night, he would sit by the fire and stare at the empty chair where she had once sat. He found himself replaying the moments they had shared, the quiet walks along the shore, the way her eyes lit up when she touched the water, the soft melodies she hummed as if singing to the waves. They were small memories, but they stayed with him, like whispers of a dream he didn't want to forget. He often returned to the rocky outcrop where he had first seen her. The seals still gathered there, their dark eyes watching him with a knowing calm. Ronan would sit on the rocks, letting the cool sea breeze brush against his face, and listen to the distant calls of the seals. He wondered if she was among them, watching from afar, her spirit as untamed and boundless as the ocean itself. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Ronan noticed something glinting in the sand near the water's edge. He approached and found a small, smooth shell, unlike any he had ever seen. Its surface shimmered with colors that shifted like the light on the waves, and when he held it to his ear, he could hear the faint echo of the sea. Ronan smiled, his heart swelling with a bittersweet joy. He didn't know if the shell was a gift, a message, or merely a coincidence, but it felt like a connection to her, a reminder that though she was gone, she was not entirely lost to him. And so, life went on. The sea remained as unpredictable as ever, its tides shaping the lives of those who lived along its shores. For Ronan, it was no longer just a source of sustenance or stories. It was a reminder of love, freedom, and the sacrifices both required. Years later, when villagers spoke of Ronan, they would say he was a man who understood the sea better than most. They whispered that he had seen things others couldn't, that the waves had revealed their secrets to him. And sometimes, on misty evenings, a lone fisherman could be seen sitting on the rocks, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He never spoke of what he was waiting for, but those who knew him understood. The sea, after all, remembers. And so did Ronan. And so, dear listener, our tale drifts to its end, much like the tide recedes from the shore, leaving behind traces of its presence, marks in the sand, treasures carried from faraway places, and echoes of its eternal song. Tonight, we walked along the rugged shores of Northern Ireland, where the boundaries between our world and the otherworldly blur, and the sea holds secrets older than time itself. We met Ronan, a man shaped by the rhythm of the tides, whose quiet life was forever changed by a fleeting connection with a being from another realm. The Selkie, both woman and seal, taught him that love is not possession but freedom, and that sometimes the truest act of care is letting go. In her absence, Ronan discovered a profound truth, that love and longing, though bittersweet, are the very things that tether us to the world. The sea, with its infinite depths and ceaseless motion, became his companion, a reminder of what was lost and what was gained. As we leave this story behind, let us carry its lessons with us. Like Ronan, we all face choices that test our hearts, moments where we must decide between holding on and setting free. And though those choices may bring sorrow, they also open the door to growth, understanding, and a connection to something greater than ourselves. Now, close your eyes and imagine the sea once more. Hear the waves as they crash against the rocks, feel the cool mist on your skin, and listen for the faintest whisper of a song carried on the wind. Perhaps it is a Selkie's melody, or perhaps it is the memory of this tale echoing in your heart. Thank you for joining me tonight on Whisper Tales, where stories of wonder and mystery weave their way into the quiet corners of our minds. If you enjoyed this journey, be sure to return for more tales of magic, longing, and discovery. Until then, may your dreams be filled with the gentle rhythm of the sea and the beauty of the unknown. Good night and safe travels wherever your heart may lead you.